All right, the second half of the NBA season is underway, and when we talk basketball, I love to bring on these guys. They are the hosts of the Sorry to Interrupt podcast. We got a few crossovers here with Sean Rowe, Tom Bocchino. Welcome, guys. How are you?
Doing great, Mike. Thanks for having us on.
What's up, man? How are you?
Pretty good. We got to start with the most important order of business here. Did Mac McClung save the slam dunk contest?
I feel like so many people over the last, since Vince Carter have saved and then it's died again. I feel like Sean and I talked about this on our podcast. It was Michael Jordan and Wilkins, and then we had Vince Carter, and then it died again, and it was resurrected by Nate Robinson and Dwight Howard, and then it died again, and it was resurrected by Aaron Gordon, as well as obviously Zach LaVine. This is our most recent resurrection, which to me means we're in for another 5 years of garbage, and then something good will come out of it. I don't see it happening every year, and there's no star power in it. So you really need somebody to blow you away. And the other thing is that all the really good dunks have already been done.
Yeah, I agree with Tom. We talked about it. It's hard to say a slam dunk contest was saved when a guy on a two-way contract did it. Not taking anything away from McClung's dunking prowess. Obviously, he's been viral for that since, his high school days when he originally committed to Georgetown and eventually went to Texas Tech. But yeah, it's just hard for me to say it's saved. Like Tom said, the star power is not there, in addition to the fact that every dunk has pretty much been done. So I think that they're going to have to find a way. Tom and I did a lengthy conversation about how All-Star Weekend might need a couple tweaks, particularly the game that we saw was down 20% from even last year. So I think they need to make some adjustments.
Yeah, I think they do. I think the only thing that's good right now in that weekend is a three-point contest. I feel like everything else is sort of a mess between the game. Nobody actually tries, and the only thing worked for a year, and now I think it's sort of novelty's worn off here. The dunk contest has no marquee power. Like, they honestly should just make the dunk contest for charity, try and guilt the stars into doing it.
Yeah, I just think that, and Sean says this all the time, nobody wants to get embarrassed. And that's the thing, the three-point shootout still has the main big dogs in it. Who won it this year? Lillard?
Yep.
So they still have the superstars in it and the guys that are actually playing in the All-Star game, whereas the dunk contest had, all fringe G League guys.
Yeah, it's just, and even the 3 points. I mean, you see Lillard hit the half-court shot. He just pulled up from half-court in the game and drained a three. So it's like, that's being a little bit more done with regularity now. You even see some of these guys in college who are hitting absolute bombs. So I don't know. The game itself and the weekend just has lost a lot of luster. And I
the only thing that I would do that would be different, and I feel like they did this earlier on in the dunk contest, is I would try and pick out a superstar when they're young, because I feel like take Anthony Edwards for example. If you ask him in his rookie year to do it, I feel like you have a much better chance at getting a guy, just buying low on a guy that has star potential. That's what I would do, is just have all rookies do it.
The issue I have with this, though, is obviously, for a while, all the big guys did it. You mentioned Jordan did it, Dominique Wilkins did it, Kobe even did it once, Vince Carter did it once. Once LeBron just continually refused to do it, it just gave all the other stars an out to not have to do it.
I agree with you, but if you look at all those guys at the point where they were in their career, they all did it within their first, 2 to 3 years of their career.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even now you're getting guys like Ja Morant turning it down. He's in that window.
That's true. I mean, what is Ja Morant in year 4? Year 4? Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like you need to get them while they're rookies, because now at this point, once they have a couple moments in the league, they think they're too good for it, or they don't want to embarrass themselves or whatever. And yeah, you're right. LeBron did kind of set that precedent by never doing it.
Yeah, he never did. Let's go to the locals here. There's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about here. Start with the Knicks here, because obviously going into the season, we sort of said, who knows? Jalen Brunson is good. We don't know how this roster is going to mesh this year. And surprise, surprise, if the season were to end today, as of day recording, they would be clear of the play-in turn. They'd be in the 6th spot right now. So I'll go to you first, Tom. Tom, what do you think about the Knicks?
I mean, from a individual season standpoint, I do like the way they're playing. That Brunson signing, I think he was worth every penny. Sean and I both warned everybody that he was not going to be a superstar. But he did play like an all-star this year, actually above what we are all expecting with his own team. So for this individual season, I'm very happy with the way the Knicks are playing. I love the Josh Hart addition, but I'm still, for the long term future, disappointed in the Knicks. I just feel like we're not developing our young guys, and we don't have the coach to develop our young guys. We have a coach that you want to. I think the league has passed Thibodeau by, but he's more of a coach that you go out and get when you want to take a team to the next level. So for the long term, I think the Knicks are still stuck in limbo.
I mean, for me, looking at Brunson's impact, it's a great example of how the general fan looks at contracts and the discrepancy between how fans look at what a player is making and what the league value for players are. You know, there was a very common sentiment around the Knicks fans of, oh, is this too much money? And it's like, well, this is the going rate for a starting point guard in the NBA. Like, he's not overpaid. He's appropriately paid. And in addition to that, he's just a really great player. We saw him with Dallas last year coexist with Luka, get to the West Final. This guy is a legitimate, he's a legitimate number one point guard. Now, is he Kyrie Irving? Is he some of these other guys? John Morant? No, but you don't need him to be. He's the kind of guy that a lot of great players are going to want to come play with. And he can fit his game to play with a lot of different players. Look at the year Randall's having. It's because Brunson is very happy making sure he gets his shots in his spots.
Yeah, I feel like the Randall thing is a good call because I feel like the last couple of years he sort of had to do a lot of like point forward responsibilities here, bringing the ball up and stuff like that, and his struggle with his shot selection and whatnot. Now he's able to run within the flow of the offense. He changed his shot profile where he's taking more threes and getting to the rim more as opposed to taking those 1-2s that made him the comeback like the most improved player a couple of years ago. I feel like the Julius Randle Renaissance has really helped to save that contract for the Knicks so far.
Well, he's also not out of control anymore. I mean, he still has his moments, don't get me wrong. I mean, I remember that game a couple weeks ago where it was like, I think it was against the Magic, and it was just like, oh my gosh, dude, what are you doing? But at the end of the day, he doesn't have the ball in his hands in those pressurized situations, which is really what the Knicks need. They need a true point guard. We've been saying this for how long, and they finally have one.
Yeah, they absolutely do here. I also like, as Tom mentioned earlier, the Josh Hart trade, I think, made a lot of sense to this team. I mean, he was not the pure jump shooter that they were looking for and they're still looking for, but like in terms of adding a quality defender to the rotation and a guy who could go all out and rebound and get to the bucket with regularity, he's a good bench player for this team.
Oh, no doubt about it. I think if we said this before, if Tibbs could have built a two guard in the lab, it would be Josh Hart. 3-and-D guy that crashes on the boards, offensively and defensively. He's the perfect Tibbs type player. And I like the way Randall's playing. I mean, if Randall was a superstar type player, you'd be looking at a 40 win record instead of a 33. But this kind of is what you get with Randall in his perfect state, where he's not completely controlling the ball, but he does tend to get out of control at times. But you have to take the good with the bad with him, just because that's the type of the player he is.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, I do think look at the standings right now at the start of the second half. I mean, where they are, they're in a pretty solid spot. You have the top four in the East are pretty set with Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, and Cleveland. You're looking at the next sort of trio here is Brooklyn post the Durant Irving trades, the Knicks, and the Heat. Do you think they have enough right now to sort of avoid that play-in and get themselves in the top six?
It's going to be close because the Heat are just I can't explain why, with Kyle Lowry being basically playing himself out of the league at this point. And they got off to a terrible start, but their defense and their rotations is just so amazing. The Heat are going to overtake the Knicks. That's a prediction on my part, but I think it's going to come down to the Knicks versus the Nets for the 6th seed. I think the Heat are going to jump ahead into that 5, especially with the addition of Kevin Love when he gets healthy. It's going to be really interesting to see if the Nets can hold off the Knicks for the 6th seed and avoid that playing game.
The Knicks have as good of a chance as either of those teams, that group of 3. If Brunson continues to play the way he's playing right now, and Mitchell Robinson sounds like he's about to be back as soon as potentially Friday night, the first game of the second half of the season. So I like the way the Knicks are playing right now, but they still scare me in certain moments. I need to see them have more of those games like they did against Atlanta, where they just absolutely pummel an inferior opponent. Because those are 10, and Tom, I think you know this has been a complaint of yours. they sometimes sleepwalk through some of those games, and you can't do that with 22, 23, however many games are left in the season.
Yeah, and look, you mentioned the Heat here, too. I'm looking at their schedule right now. They play the Heat 3 times in the next month or so. It's Miami, Friday, March 3rd in Miami, Wednesday, March 22nd in Miami, and went again a week later in New York. So those Knicks Heat games will be huge.
Yeah, I would not be shocked if the Knicks get swept in that series, in the next 3 games. They'll probably take 1 out of the 3. If I were to place a bet on it, it'd be 1 and 2. The Heat are just you can't put them down. They're going to find their way to avoid the play-in game, and then whoever they play in the playoffs, watch out, because that's a team that is going to push you to 7 games in a series.
Yeah, before we move on from the Knicks here, one thing that I think is worth monitoring for Knicks fans, they still have all those picks they're trying to hold on to. I think they did a good job with the Josh Hart trade, make sure their pick gets conveyed pretty quickly, and that was they have all their assets available here. With all the chaos in Atlanta right now, should Knicks fans be looking out here at the Trae Young situation saying, maybe?
No.
Yeah, you don't think no shot at that?
No. It's not no shot. I don't want Trae Young. Yeah. I don't think Trae Young is a winning player. I think he's a different version of Russell Westbrook. I think he's a big stats, no wins kind of guy. And I think Sean has said it 100 times. The worst thing that happened to that Hawks team was the fact that they made that fluky run to the Eastern Conference Finals when they beat the Knicks in the first round. 2 years ago? I don't see Trae Young as a winning player. He's kind of a guy that you have to build your offense around, and you still don't get big time wins around it. He's a good passer, but he's not a willing passer, and he makes terrible decisions late in the shot clock.
Yeah, there's been a lot of Trae Young, buzz around the Nets social media as well as a potential guy, and I'm saying the same thing as Tom. Like, please no, for the love of God, no.
You bet your ass I'll talk myself into it if they do trade him.
Well, either of us would, but you don't.
But I don't want it. No, not at all.
Yeah, because it's curious as that because obviously then the Nets now in a similar spot where they have all these assets they can trade, and they're looking for the guy to try and trade him for. It's hard to see where that guy's coming from now because you have, obviously, Trae Young's lurking out there. Does Bradley Beal ever decide he wants to leave Washington? That's another one you're kind of looking at. But, there's not much else really in the immediate horizon in terms of stars forcing their way out of teams.
Who would you rather? Because I have had a history of saying that both those players are not winning players. And they're not number one guys, but they're treated as number one guys. And Trae Young needs the ball like a number one guy. Who would you guys rather have out of the two?
Whichever one takes less to get.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would talk myself into either of them, but honestly, neither of those guys are winning players at all. They're not going to move the needle. If they're willing to submit to it, they're like a third or a fourth player on a championship team.
That is interesting, though, Mike. I wonder what you think, because the Bradley Beal, he could be a very interesting player if you can surround him with Randall and Brunson.
He'd be a much better fit than Trae Young.
That would work. Trae Young would not. He would come in and think it's his team. I don't think Bradley Beal is at the point in his career where he would walk in, unless it's a comparable situation to Washington, where he thinks it's his team.
Yeah, I don't think the Knicks would be in on Trae Young as much because as long as Thibodeau's the coach, I don't think he wants that one ball dominant player on offense. He likes the movements. I don't think he's going to do that. Beal, I feel like fits that bill. I know they're poking around the Bulls, I think, with the Zach LaVine thing. See that Bull. I don't know if that's a fit either.
I like Zach LaVine, and I don't think he would cost you as much as the other two guys that we're talking about. I think the Bulls think much more highly of him than the league does, and that's why he didn't get traded at the deadline. So it really would depend on the price.
There was a lot of Knicks and LaVine buzz on deadline day that even as recently as 2 hours before the deadline that the Knicks and Bulls had talked names and players and draft capital. But at the end of the day, like Tom said, I think the Bulls value him a little bit higher. Also, the Bulls are in a very weird situation right now. They're signing Patrick Beverley. They think they're positioned to get into the postseason. I don't see it happening in any way, shape, or form. But LaVine's interesting though because that knee is not good, and that's a player that could age very poorly.
I think the reason why they're going so hard for the play is because they don't forget they owe that pick to Orlando. It's top 4 protected from the Vucevic trade.
Yeah.
They're trying to make sure that maximize their odds of not having to give up a high lottery pick to the Magic.
Yeah, and I actually like their chances. I've looked at their schedule, and they do have a tough run coming up, but the only two teams in front of them are Washington and Toronto, and those two teams could fall. One of those two teams could fall rather quickly.
Plus, Atlanta's in there too, and they just fired their coach.
Yeah, exactly. So there is. I do like their chances of getting into the play-in game. And I don't know. I don't like Pat Beverly. I think he's well past his prime. But if you think it's going to move the needle, I could understand it from a buyout perspective.
Yeah, let's go to the Nets now here. He's spent a lot of time on the Nets here. The Nets here, the super team era is over. It's been covered in depth here. Sean is the Nets guy of this group. So, like, your thoughts on how this era ended here and, like, this disappointment of, like, what you were promised a couple of years ago and ended up being, like, getting one playoff wins, the same amount of series wins the Knicks got at Melo.
It's one of the biggest failures in sports history. I don't think there's any other way to talk about it. For a stretch, you had 3 of the top 10 players in the entire league on the same team. And the various iterations of this team with, Kyrie and Durant, with LeVert, Allen, and Dinwiddie, and then obviously the Harden period, and then, what was going to become of Ben Simmons and some of these other guys. And it was just, Tom and I talked about it at length on the pod. It was time to rip the Band-Aid off. I got to be honest, as fun as it was thinking and talking yourself into potentially this team going on a run. I mean, let's not forget they were 18-2 over a 20-game stretch from late November into early January. But the drama was just insane. Constantly worrying about who's going to ask out, or are they going to come back? Kyrie was obviously at the focal point of everything. If he gets vaccinated, Harden stays. If Durant doesn't get hurt, Harden stays. Simmons is not the albatross that he is. But I also think that I said this, and Tom kind of made fun of me for the comment, but you got to dare to be great. And that's what they did. And I think that there's a lot of organizations across all sports that have to take chances. The Brooklyn Nets and formerly New Jersey Nets have never been a team that have attracted top marquee superstars. But I think this is a blueprint for them and then other teams going forward, where when you completely turn over the keys to your organization and instead of working with the superstars, you work for the superstars, it's going to do more harm than good. So it was an epic failure, and completely ridding themselves of any of the questions and just moving on, I think was the right move.
Tom, anything you want to add on that one? Because I do figure also this era, I mean, I think Sean put it correctly here. The difference between, like, LeBron going, it's not like LeBron went to Miami and they did everything that he wanted to do in Miami. It was still like Pat Riley was in charge there.
Not necessarily, though. Well, that's the thing, right? Like, he wanted Spolster fired and they wouldn't do it.
Yeah, they put their foot down on a few things, but they still did draft Mario Chalmers. LeBron has left every team that he's ever been on in complete shambles. I mean, you look at the Cavaliers, they were a lottery team up until LeBron came back. When he left, Heat were in the lottery a few years post LeBron. And then the Lakers, I mean, they're in complete shambles when LeBron leaves, and they're still giving up unprotected picks when he will be gone and probably retired. But for this Nets thing, I honestly don't have an adjective to describe it. The whole thing is so crazy. I think if you ran the last three and a half years in a simulator, this is probably the worst outcome. I think a lot of times it ends up in a championship. But I do think from a league perspective and a macro perspective on the league, this new CBA, Sean and I talked about, is going to be very interesting, because I just think the owners are fed up, and the player empowerment error, if you will be tamped down a little bit in the next CBA, just because it's gotten way over the rails. And I'm all for players being able to choose where they want to go and whatnot. I think they should be able to, but it's gotten way past that, to the point where you're costing teams and fan bases money and whatnot for whatever you want. And there's no loyalty at all whatsoever. So these teams thinking that they're doing these guys a favor to keep their good image in the league, none of them care. So what's the point? And I eventually want an owner to stand up to one of these guys and be like, no, you're under contract for 3 more years. You're staying unless we get equal value.
Yeah, that's for sure here. I think this also is a big hit to Durant's legacy too, because once again, like, he basically tries to draw up the blueprint for his roster. It doesn't go his way. And then as soon as things basically go to shit, he says, get me out of here, put me on another ready-made team to win it all. And for a guy who cares about basketball as Durant does, I feel like that's got to be a stain on his legacy.
Oh, I don't think there's a doubt about it.
I think hitching his wagon to Kyrie Irving is one of the worst career decisions that anyone has made in the history of careers, much less professional sports, just in careers in general. It was basically he just lost 3.5 years of his career just in limbo.
Yeah, Mike. I mean, it certainly is a blemish, but he's one of these weird guys who doesn't seem to care about all that. If
he does, but he doesn't.
Well, that's what he says he does. Like he talks out of both sides of his mouth, because when he demanded the trade in the summer, he said, "I'm only coming back if Marks and Nash are fired." And then they say, they kiss and make up, and then Nash is fired, and he says, "Oh, I wasn't aware of that." And then, he said, "My legacy is much more dependent on if guys like Nick Claxton and Cam Thomas become stars and learn the craft." And then, then he's traded again and wants out. So he talks out of both sides of his mouth. He's very enigmatic, like Kyrie is, but just a little bit differently. Obviously, you can't question his commitment to wanting to be on the floor. But if he goes and wins in Phoenix for another, I guess you want to say tortured franchise, I think that everybody will just look past it.
Yeah, I think his legacy is if he wins in Phoenix, he's basically the ultimate hired gun, because he was the final piece of the Warriors. They had their little dynasty run, and he becomes the final piece of the Suns. That's basically what he is. He can no longer be in that conversation I'm the Batman. I lead teams. He's basically the ultimate Robin.
I guess. I mean, he was still the best player on those Warriors teams. It was Steph's team, but he was the best player on those teams. I think as great as Booker is and as good as Chris Paul has been, and Ayton, starting to turn around, I think that when we look back on a hypothetical, let's say Phoenix wins this season, we'll say that Kevin Durant was the best player on that team. But I understand your point, Mike. It's well taken.
It is well taken here. And speaking of the Nets here, now we'll go back to what Sean Marks had to deal with here, because he has a year from hell, basically, with Kyrie's anti-Semitism and then him refusing the extension, wanting a trade, then Durant wants a trade, and he dumps them off. He gets a bunch of picks, a bunch of young wings. How do you think Sean Marks did with these trades to restock the cupboard a little bit?
Tom, you want to start?
Sure. I think Sean Marks was put in an incredibly tough position over the last couple of years, given basically the players, and it probably was partially his fault, were given the keys to the car and they were able to run the organization. Unique is a massive understatement to the situation that he was put in with these trades. The Harden trade, it kills me, but I guess you're in a situation where the guy can walk at the end of the year anyways. And then the Kyrie situation, you had to get rid of him. I like what they got. And Kevin Durant, you're never going to get equal value for a player like that. So I did think that they got away with what they could. If you want to poo-poo what he's done on the fringes with this team, you can. But I just think the situation was so tough for Sean Marks that I do think he did the best job that he could given the circumstances.
Agreed. I like this roster from a couple of different reasons. Is this roster too clunky in its current point? Yes, 100%. They have 7 wings. Yuta Watanabe, who's one of the best three-point shooters in the league this year, is going to be riding the bench. Edmund Sumner, who's had a lot of really good games as the Nets' second unit, he's probably not playing now. Patty Mills not playing. But listen, to get a Dorian Finney-Smith, who's a really top-end defender in this league, great role player, Spencer Dinwiddie, who obviously his best days were in a Nets uniform, and to Dallas for really important. And then you're also able to force Phoenix to do what they didn't want to do in the summer, which was include Mikal Bridges in a trade. They were adamant in the summer that they were not going to do it. They also were able to get 4 unprotected firsts from Phoenix, which they were not willing to part with any more than 2 in the summer. So you got them to up their ante. The new owner obviously played a major role in that, and the sense of urgency in Phoenix is legit. But they're going to be a fascinating team in this offseason, because now they have recouped all these picks that they gave Houston in the Harden trade. They have a lot of super desirable players. Mikal Bridges, there was the report from Chris Haynes that Memphis offered 4 firsts for Mikal Bridges, 4 unprotected firsts. Dorian Finney-Smith was offered for 2, or the team offered 2 firsts for him before the Nets decided that they weren't going to turn those guys into trade assets. Cam Johnson is a restricted free agent. They could keep him. Obviously, on their own roster, they've got Cam Thomas, who's had a really good stretch here. He's a legit bona fide scorer. And you have Nick Claxton, who's going to finish probably top 3 in Defensive Player of the Year. So they have some really interesting pieces. They can do a lot. I think they're well positioned to go out and get a superstar. Please, for the love of God, don't be Trae Young. But I think that they're going to use the summer to decide what they want to do. Let's not forget, too, they still have Joe Harris's contract that's very easily movable. Patty Mills, which is very easily movable. So it's going to be fascinating to see what they do. But I do like do I love this team right now? I think they have a lot. It's just way too consolidated. But I think that they have some very intriguing building blocks.
Yeah, I think in terms of the roster, I think it's also interesting with them guys. The team they remind me of, I think it's more of a college level team. A couple of years ago, I think maybe 2021. I think the year before, I think 2021 season, the Maryland Terrapins, I think, play a team basically like 5 guys roll between like 6'6" and 6'8", and they made the NCAA tournament. I think won a game before they bowed out there. So I think that's sort of funny to see that experiment having on the NBA level right now. Yeah,
and I didn't even mention Ben Simmons because I don't think there's a reason to. The guy I don't think has a future in Brooklyn. I think they're unfortunately going to have to use a young player and maybe 1 or 2 of those picks to ship him out. I think Jacques Vaughn, who just got a contract extension, doesn't want any part of him. It's a failed experiment. Let's move on. But, man, if he could just be 80% of what he was in Philly, what an unbelievable piece he'd be. But he's a shell of himself.
Yeah, it's a shame he's not even 10% of what he was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about a point where we talked about earlier about this, handing the keys to the car here. I think we should have all realized that the Nets are going to be more trouble than they were. I remember back prior to the first season when they were in Brooklyn and Kyrie and KD were doing that podcast together, and Kyrie was like, oh, like one day I'll coach, one day KD will coach, one day like Stoudemire, assistant coach, will be the coach. Like once that happened, we should have realized, this is not going to work out as well as we thought it would.
No, but every team with that talent will talk themselves into it.
Yeah.
I know you both as Knicks fans would have.
100%. No doubt about it. And that's what I've been saying to anybody that asks or even on the podcast. The Nets and every other team in the NBA would have done that 100 times.
Yeah, they would have. The Knicks have been trying to do that for years. They've had nobody just wants to actually take their money or assets to come.
Yeah, don't remind me.
Yeah. Yeah, and
it's a joke.
Right now the Nets are, I was mentioning here, they're barely ahead of the Knicks. They're a half game ahead of them in the standings here. They are trying to fend off both them and the Heat to stay in the top 6. Can the Nets do that, you think, with this weird wing-heavy roster?
I think they can. As weird as it sounds, I think they can. They are an unbelievably good defensive team right now. They really put the clamps down on Philly when they played them. Embiid just took over in the last couple seconds. They laid an egg against the Knicks, but they actually beat the Heat in the last game before the All-Star break, and Jimmy Butler did absolutely nothing against Bridges. I think they can score enough. They have shooting all over the place with Curry and Harris and Bridges and Johnson and Cam Thomas. And Jacques Vaughn, his calling card is defense and getting these guys to play max effort. So I'm actually going to say that they will be a top 6 seed. I don't know who will be there. They also already won their tiebreaker against Miami. They have one more game with Miami in a couple weeks. They've won 2 of the first. So, and if they beat the Knicks next week, they will have taken that series as well. They're up 2-1 in that season series. So I'm going to say, yeah. I'm not going to say that they're going to, win 18 of the 22 games, but I think they can hold on because I don't have as much confidence in the Heat as Tom does. And, I don't think that the Knicks are markedly better than the Nets, even with this weird roster.
I agree. I mean, I said it earlier. I think the Heat are going to jump both the Knicks and the Nets, and I think it's going to come down to Nets or Knicks, and it's really a coin flip from there. Who ends up with that 6th seed?
Yeah, that is the challenge right now here, and obviously, like these guys, we both know neither team's winning a title this year right now. So, if you had to place a chip right now on one of them for the next 5 years, which you think is in better shape, who would you put the chip on?
What do you think, Tom?
Shit. Sorry for swearing. I'm gonna go with the Knicks. I just think that they're in a better position up front. I just think that they know what they are more. And they have two high-end talents in Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson, and they have the same kind of draft capital as the Nets. The only question is, like you said earlier, Phillips, who are they going to trade for, and when are guys going to start being willing to come to the Nets?
Yeah, I'm just going to go with my team because I don't know about either one, but I've seen the Nets do it. I've seen the Nets take their, overachieving roster and have superstars come here. I haven't seen that with the Knicks.
I can't blame you.
I see a complete disconnect between, and Tom, this is, we've talked about this so much, Mike, on our pod, is the disconnect between the Knicks front office and the Knicks coaching staff. It just doesn't seem, they seem to highly overvalue guys like Emmanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin. So, if you're not going to move those guys, but they're not really going to have a chance to blossom. Also, RJ Barrett is not even closing games right now. I know he doesn't get talked about as much because the Nets were a superstar-laden team, but Cam Thomas is an absolute stud scoring. And Nick Claxton is a legitimate, defensive monster. And then you have a Mikal Bridges. So, I think those three pieces alone are huge, not to mention the draft picks and the other good players on the roster and easily movable contracts. So I think both, it really is a coin flip, but I'm going to take my Nets.
Yeah, I think I would lean the Nets as well, just because, again, you've seen stars willing to go to the Nets, whereas James Dolan still owns the Knicks. I feel there's a lot of guys in the league just don't want to play for him.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Thank you for reminding me that James Dolan still owns the Knicks. It's a sad scene. He is not trying to sell. But yeah, I think that's truly the thing that holds the Knicks back. It's between the fact that they never know who the hell they are, and the fact that they just can't attract, for whatever reason, top talent.
Yeah, be careful what you say here, though. You might end up on the Garden security list in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know. I can't even get MSG at my apartment, and before you know it, I won't be allowed to go to Knicks games either. But somebody's got to speak the truth.
He's going to be blacklisted like the rest of them.
Yeah.
He'll be hanging out watching the game with what's his name, Charles Oakley.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and all the Warriors that are suing the Garden.
Yeah.
All right, here. So let's round out here with a general picture here. So, who do you like as the top team in the East here out of that top four we mentioned earlier of Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, and Cleveland? Which team do you like the best coming out of the East?
I mean, I picked the Bucks to go to the finals at the beginning of the year, and I'm going to stick with them. I just think Giannis is subtly feeling a little disrespected with all this talk of, Tatum and Jokic and Embiid, and I feel like he just feels, that he's the top guy, and I'm not going to argue with that. I think when Giannis is at his best, and if Middleton and Holiday's been playing out of his mind, and if Middleton can get himself healthy, they're the team to beat. I think the Bucks are going to go all the way to the finals.
I'm keeping an eye on this wrist injury. It sounds like he's out of the woods as far as a really significant injury, but wrist injuries can linger a little bit. But I picked Milwaukee as well at the beginning of the season, Mike, but I'm going with Boston. They've just given me no reason to think otherwise, and they added Mike Muscala, who's a perfect fit for them. Tatum and Brown are absolute beasts. They got a taste of the finals last year going to 6. Mazzulla seems to be doing a really good job as their head coach, so they removed the interim tag from them. So I'm going to take the Celtics. I just think from top to bottom, defensively, offensively, their versatility, and obviously having just been to the finals a year ago. I know Milwaukee won 2 years ago, but I have questions about Middleton and some of the other, supporting cast on that roster. Last time we saw Jay Crowder, he didn't play very well for the Suns in that Dallas series. So I'm going to take Boston.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun one for sure here. And I'm also going to want to take a look here at the Western Conference here, because obviously Denver's been running the West all year, and now you got things that are interesting out there. You got the Clippers who've been slowly building up. Kawhi Leonard, you got him in the mix. Memphis has been great. Sacramento, surprisingly, is third place in the conference here. You got the big trades with Phoenix and Dallas here. So, who do you like in the West right now?
Personally, I like the Clippers. I had the Warriors going to the finals at the beginning of the year, but this Steph injury and Klay Thompson just not being completely consistent, as well as Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins seemingly taking a major step back from what they did last year into the playoffs especially, I like the Clippers if they can stay healthy. I know that they got Russell Westbrook, but I think with those two guys up front and the depth that they have, excluding Russell Westbrook, I think that they have a chance to go to the finals.
For me, it's Phoenix or bust. And I know how great Denver's been all year. The Phoenix Suns are adding Kevin freaking Durant, who was playing like an MVP before he got hurt on January 4th. Devin Booker, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, Kevin Durant. They brought in T.J. Warren in that deal with the Nets. They also signed Terrence Ross. No, this is Phoenix. I don't know. Jokic is unbelievable, and so is Murray. But no, I think it's Phoenix is now catapulted. If they don't make the NBA Finals, I think Durant's going to get absolutely crushed.
I am feeling good though overall because I feel like I'm going to hit all 4 of my over-unders picks on the year. So I'm very happy about that.
There you go.
Nice.
Yeah. I had an over on Denver on the 48.5, so I'm going to clear that one probably about like 2 weeks. I had over on the Knicks, so I'm going to hit that one as well. I also had under on Brooklyn, the Clippers. I feel pretty good about all 4.
Oh, you definitely had a shakeup in Brooklyn, so you're welcome. I'll say that my team very much contributed to your success.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little worried with that 12-game winning streak, but then once KD got hurt, I'm like, okay, I'll find a way to hit this number.
I mean, it's funny. Like we talk about them with the sky's falling. They're 11 or 10 games over 500 still.
Here he goes, talking himself into it.
No, they're not a final team. If they can get to like a 7th game of a first round series, that's a win right now with recalibrated expectations.
If they can avoid the play-in game, that's a win.
Yeah,
that too.
Yeah, we'll see what happens down the stretch. I think you guys are coming on here. If people want to check out your pod, how can they do that?
Well, you can follow us on Twitter at Sorry Sports. I always tweet out the podcast. At Start and Interrupt Podcast. Get it wherever the podcast. I don't know, wherever they put the podcast. It's everywhere.
That's
right.
It's out in the cloud. You can go pull it down if you want.
Exactly. There you go.
Thank you, Mike. Very well said.
All right, guys. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.